Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by OnlineGreatBooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas. You guys have heard the intro. I'm Scott.
Hi, I'm Karl.
That's Karl. And today we're going to talk about Gabriel Marcel's book, Man Against Mass Society. I am reading a Gateway Editions translation from, I think it's 1952.
Yeah, St. Augustine's Press from South Bend, Indiana, has the edition that I have in my hand. So they've reprinted some of this stuff. Our page numbers might be different, but we'll make do.
Yeah.
So I want to preface this, and then I may rant.
My favorite.
Okay. So I've read a bit of Marcel. I am not an expert.
Good.
Okay. I am probably going to get something wrong. And what I was thinking is like, am I going to be afraid to talk about him? And then, no. So I got really mad that we have this tendency, if you are not an absolute expert on something, you're not going to read his book and you're certainly not going to talk about it. We have books walled away where nobody reads them. And then we tell you, you have to go to academia and you have to listen to the guy with the PhD to tell you what it means and probably dismiss it, and say, well, it was time-bound and class-bound and you don't need to read it. And that really bothers me. They're gatekeepers. No, you should just go dive into Marcel. He's hard. Isn't he hard?
He's hard. And
he's hard.
I've got problems with him, but it's okay.
Yeah, but there's gems in there. And to say the idea that we shouldn't read stuff just really, really bothers me.
I've done a kind of orientation, get to know you seminar or discussions with all of our new Online Great Books members this week. And I keep telling them that to not be scared of seminar. And the example I give them about this is that you and I get on here and turn the microphones on, and then we think out loud in public. Mm-hmm. And you make all kinds of mistakes. And at first it's pretty spooky because there's somebody out there that's spent their life reading Marcel and is going to deuce on whatever it is I say about it.
Yeah.
And to him, I say,
so do I. And I bet you Marcel would say the same thing.
I think so.
I am, what is that, 2 degrees of separation from Gabriel Marcel?
Oh, if you're 2 degrees away, I'm 3. What's up?
Right. So Bernard Toussaint, who was a professor at Benedictine University in Lisle.
Oh, I thought he was like a New Orleans clarinet player.
It sounds like it, right? He's one of the good old-time metaphysicians, and he taught into his 80s, and I think the students didn't quite get him. Some of them did. Well, anyway, he died and gave me a bunch of his books, but he used to tell this, among them, a bunch of Marcel books, for which, thank you, Bernard. Yeah. But in the early 70s, Marcel came to campus, and they got to have dinner together and sit at a table, and he was a very calm, gravelly voiced, monotone kind of a guy, but he would get a little bit animated telling this story about there was a woman at the table who asked a conference question. So speaking as a member of the faculty here and as a woman and in my role as the head of the whatever, and she just went on and apparently for about half an hour, the whole length of time they had to talk, she was talking.
Yeah, so conference questions is when somebody on there's a panel, and someone stands up and walks over to the microphone, and they give you gives the panel their life's work, and then finishes up by saying, "Thoughts?" And the time is over, right? Is that it?
Yeah, it's a filibuster.
Yeah.
To talk about your dissertation in front of other people, and then say to the person, "What do you think?" And I hate it.
When I'm in charge, can't do it no more.
Yeah, so I suppose we can do a little bit of his life story. I'm just pulling it off Wikipedia because I'm as expert as you guys are, although I've read a bunch of it. Born in 1889, died in 1973. He thought of himself more as a playwright, so he has plays that you can read. So the philosophy books are kind of obscure, and they kind of have to be if he's right about his main points. So they are hard. But you can read the plays and get a flavor and a sense of what's going on. He also wrote music. In World War I, they didn't know it was World War I then.
The Great War.
The first part. He was the head of the information service. So it was his job, if your relative or your friend or your brother or your son died, he's the guy that found you and sent you the letter.
Not a job I want.
Right. So one of the things you'll see here is kind of a horror of abstraction.
Yeah.
Of taking the person and saying, rather than Scott Hambrick, you are an example of Homo oklahomensis. That you are the form rather than the particular.
A psychic object, he says.
Yeah. So I suppose that's enough intro. You want to dive in?
Yeah, so he wrote this thing in 1952. So they're still sweeping up all the broken glass from World War II at this point. And he's in Franceland. He's in France. And he writes, Man Against Mass Society. We just read chapters 1 through 3. Mm-hmm. So if you're reading with us, that's as far as we go. I think I'm going to finish this book, even though my slate is pretty full. Gosh, in the preface alone. I mean, we could just talk about the preface, man.
Sure, let's go. If we just stay there, that's fine.
He says some stuff about machines. Like this is 1952, and he says it will never be possible to construct a machine capable of interrogating itself on the conditions that make it possible and on the limits of its own range of operations. And he says that the more techniques advance, the more reflection is thrust into the background. He's really interested in technology as a, what does he call it? As an instrument of degradation of man.
Yep.
And so mass society isn't just people, like a whole bunch of people for him. It's art, it's media, because he talks about propaganda in here, and it's technology.
Yeah, I thought you would like that bit. As we talk across technology.
Yeah.
I think an important thing is to figure out what reflection means. And the difficulty with Marcel is he never wants to tell you what a word means because you have to figure out how he uses it.
He's a damnable continental.
I love continental philosophy.
I like my scholastics.
Except that you disagree to them. I thought you would have loved Hobbes. That he would be right up your alley.
I have learned to love him, warts and all.
Yeah.
I have. I really have. We'll talk about that in another show. We're going to do Hobbes here coming up. Yeah.
Yeah. But I love that it's like poetry, you know? It's all hinting at realities behind the curtain. And you can't pull back the curtain. And it might be that it's impossible to pull back the curtain. So let's go back to that line. To construct a machine capable of interrogating itself on the conditions that make it possible and the limit of its own range of operations. Well, that's kind of what reflection is.
Right. And the machine is all technique.
Uh-huh.
And earlier in this little passage, he's talking about the growth of technique, particularly in philosophy. And he doesn't really like it. He says that this technique will just swallow up reflection. And the reflection is, this machine can't do it, right? It's distinctly human.
Yeah. Well, why can't the machine do it? So if we make a really smart machine, if we make an AI, everybody seems to think it's just around the corner.
Our children are AIs, by the way. Are they going to grind us up and make hamburger out of us? Are they going to turn on us?
The artificial intelligences, Skynet?
Our children, they're AIs.
Maybe. I don't know. Your kids, maybe.
Your kids are AIs too. No, right? I mean, they're a consciousness, and they didn't exist, and then mommy and daddy loved each other very, very much, and then 40 weeks later, there's a new little shoot there.
Right. But okay, so what happens? The kid pops in, okay, and somewhere he's a happy little kid, and then somewhere he starts to get sullen.
Yep.
And worried about stuff. And
yeah.
Mommy, are you going to die someday? These sorts of questions. And
mortality.exe.
Yeah, so that's you could program a machine to act like it was doing this sort of thing. I don't know that it would actually do this sort of thing. Right. That has yet to be shown. I have some metaphysical objections to it, which maybe we could unpack some other day, but I don't think it's possible, and I'm sure it hasn't happened.
When are we going to read De Anima? Dang it.
Sure, when? Tomorrow?
Soon.
I want to go one paragraph down from that. So this is a good little summary paragraph. So the universal is spirit or mind, and spirit or mind is love. And he says we have to go back to Plato. Between love and intelligence, there can be no real divorce.
Yeah.
So love and intelligence go together. That's a big claim. Okay. And then he fleshes it out a little bit. Such a divorce is apparently consummated only when intelligence is degraded, or, if I may be allowed the expression, becomes merely cerebral, and, of course, when love reduces itself to mere carnal appetites. I would like to chew on that for a little bit, if you can indulge. So will and intellect, or love and intelligence, Marcel is arguing that they've got to be the same thing.
Yeah.
So if you want to know, why do you want to know? Probably because you love something.
Hobbes would say it was appetitive.
Yeah, but I think it's intellective. There is an intellectual love where you have good friends and you sit there over bourbon or something and chat for 3 hours because you want to know what this other person thinks. That's not appetitive.
I love you, Karl.
Right back at you, Scott.
No, I mean, I think that's true. That's why I cried like a baby over Emerson last week. I love what he says, and I love the guy's mind. And there is nothing else of Emerson for me to even access at this point. He's been dead for a long, long time. I've never seen his pocket watch. I mean, that's all there is.
Yeah.
All there is. And I love the guy.
Yeah. Well, so let's see how it could be degraded, because this book is about techniques of degradation.
Can I read this?
Sure.
In point of fact, the masses exist and develop following laws which are fundamentally purely mechanical, only at a level far below that at which intelligence and love are possible. Why should this be so? Because the masses partake of the human only in a degraded state. They are themselves a degraded state of the human. Do not let us seek to persuade ourselves that an education of the masses is possible. That is a contradiction in terms. What is educable is only an individual, or more exactly, a person.
Yeah? Yeah, tell me what you like about that. Or what challenges you about that.
Well, I have long thought that... Well, not thought. I've known that society doesn't exist. That doesn't mean anything. Like, there are only people. There are only people, and individual people can bring their ingenuity and genius and intelligence to bear on problems. And even when they work together, like you and I do on this podcast, we are each doing that. And then the podcast becomes the sum of the things that you and I can produce individually. But the masses don't have a goal like that. Society doesn't really have a goal like that. It's just the teeming biological meat things that live in that city. There's no way to even access the intellect, if it had one, of the masses.
Yeah, I'm not sure I entirely agree.
Don't.
I sort of agree. Okay, so I think there are such things as communities.
There are communities.
That are a little bit more than a bunch of individuals, that you get sort of a unifying thing around you. This is what nations used to be, maybe when they were smaller. This is what a team can be. Yeah, this is what your unit could be, in the army.
But that is not mass society, though.
Yeah. For me, the danger of mass society, it's like mass shipping, a bunch of things shrink wrapped on a pallet that you can then do things to, that you can manipulate, that you can tweak. For me, that's degrading.
Yeah, you're right. Because he goes on, being the continental philosopher that he is, he just goes on later to say that abstraction leads to reducing the individual to psychic objects that can be manipulated. Mm-hmm. And is that what you're getting at? Because that's where he goes, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, the spirit of abstraction. So what do we mean by abstraction? I look at a bunch of... how many cats do you have?
2.
2, and their names are?
Milton and May.
Milton and May. I think I see a picture of Milton behind you.
Yeah. That's old dead Frances. She's been gone.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What was the second one's name?
May.
Milton and May. I don't know that... One of them hid.
That's probably May.
I think, most of the time that I was there. Yeah. Now, we could abstract and say mammal. Mm. We're pulling out what is universal in the cat. We could abstract a little bit less and say cat. Felix Domesticus, whatever it is. And in all those levels of abstraction, how far can we go in abstraction? And when you abstract, do you ever end up with Milton?
No.
Right. So to abstract is to know something by knowing what it isn't. That's a continental way of putting it. I'm sorry.
Well,
it's my disease.
It's metaphysical too.
Yeah. So you never have the abstract of the individual. So it's kind of impossible to.
I would like some Karl extract. Like you just add a drop. And it's super distilled.
What would it do? What would be the effect?
It would. You would get RBF. You get that resting bitch face, and you'd be more affable on social media.
We could bottle and sell it. Yeah. So I think the spirit of abstraction for the guy, he's got an autobiography. I have it on my shelf somewhere, and I think that the dislike of abstraction had to do with that job he had in World War I.
Sure.
Where everybody is treated like a side of beef. So many corpses here, so many corpses there. Package must be delivered.
He ain't wrong.
I want to talk a little bit more about why he has to be so weird in his writing. I would say, how would you describe his writing?
It's a smart dude talking to his grandkids.
Yeah. Do you think he had an outline?
No.
No.
No way.
No. So it's like super smart guy who doesn't care where he ends up. And he just starts talking. And it's very hard to sketch out exactly where he's going. And maybe he doesn't even know himself.
He's very keen on introspection and reflection. And this is probably a reflection of his that we get to eavesdrop on.
Yeah. The method can grow out of the conviction. If you think abstraction is a problem, if you think like, I have some German philosophy books on my shelf, and you open up and they have a table of contents that is in exacting detail. They're very abstract. And if you are rebelling against that, if you've grown up on Hegel and you're rebelling against it, you're just going to walk around and talk.
Take that, Dad.
Right. But it's also a truth claim that the truth isn't something that you can grasp in a bunch of bullet points. The cat is not maybe the greatest example, but you can't grasp Milton with bullet points.
No.
And certainly not a human.
Right.
Nothing of the human, nothing of the nature of love or even really the nature of intellect or reason. If you could, then Plato wouldn't have written dialogues. And he would have just made perfect disciples.
Yeah, there are some things that we can't write proofs about, but I sure do like them.
Yeah, well, if he's right on the previous page, for me, this is page 8, what is educable is only the individual, or more exactly, a person. Well, bullet points are for training.
Fair enough.
When we teach people the squat, we don't teach them a picture.
No, but when we teach them the deadlift, we do have the 5 steps.
Yes. Our 5-step plan.
Any more preface?
No, let's go on. Let's move on. We'll circle back if we have to.
Chapter 1, paragraph 2, he says, Nietzsche says God is dead, but we're now saying man is in his death throes. That's not a prophecy. He says it's a reflective awareness. It's an awareness that something's wrong, I think. And the things that are wrong, the thing that is wrong is this widespread annihilation and degradation. He continues to say degradation. That's the theme of the first 3 chapters, I think, and maybe the rest of the book, having not read the whole thing. And here he talks about the atomic bomb and the spiritual destruction of human degradation in the same sentence. So he's very, very worried about this degradation.
Do you remember being worried about this stuff?
Being worried about which stuff? The atomic bomb?
Yeah.
Actually, both. We had a few bomb drills when I was in school, and I read 1984.
Yeah, it just occurs to me. So growing up, I remember some worry about this.
Yeah.
And nothing's really changed.
Yep.
And there's still a huge arsenal, and for some reason it's vanished from consciousness. It's like, there's the potential of killing all the life on the planet in an instant, and we don't talk about it. That's weird.
Yeah, it's weird. But we've been degraded to the point that he tells a little story about the Knights Templar, where we're rounded up at one point and tortured and interrogated. And some of these Knights Templar reported after all of that was over that they had confessed to things that weren't true. And he says that there's a certain kind of psychological torture that can get people to do things that no physical torture could do. And he says that the Stoics always said there's always suicide.
Mm-hmm.
But the psychological torture can be such that it removes man's will even to kill himself,
right,
in the face of this degradation. So when I read that, I thought about the atomic bomb thing, Karl. People don't even care.
Yeah, it's ceased to be a category of thought.
Yet they're really not worried about about death at this point. They're more worried about the gender signs on bathrooms and all kinds of things, which is really base in the face of nuclear, biological, chemical warfare.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And so how is it done? I thought you would find this interesting. If you're a Stoic, you always have that inner preserve where you can go. There's your inner life. And Marcel is saying, well, nowadays what we've learned with the techniques of degradation, which they figured out, well, they perfected in World War II and haven't quit using.
By the way, they weren't perfected in World War II.
When were they perfected?
They keep getting more perfecter.
Yes. Perfectorid.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're not allowed to have the inner life anymore. There isn't a preserve for you. They'll weasel around and make you think things that you never did. That's terrifying.
Huh.
They can find something and accuse you of things and get you to agree and sign the line and say, yes, I did it.
Yep. To that point, he says at the bottom of this, page 15, the very notion of a free country or a free people, on a little analysis, appears to be a much less distinct notion than we should be tempted to think at first. And he gives two examples. He gives examples of Sweden and Switzerland in World War II. And they notionally remained free, but they were essentially blackmailed, he says, into producing war material for the Soviet Union and or Nazi Germany.
Mm-hmm.
So they bopped around thinking they were free, but they weren't. They might have been more free than Vichy France.
So there's the line at the end of the paragraph. Is it not obvious that in a world like ours, freedom cannot exist not only because of inevitable economic interdependencies, but because of the part played by pressure, or less politely by blackmail at all levels of international intercourse, and I would say in personal intercourse as well.
You will be doxxed. You will be attacked by the Twitter mob. The HR department will kick your ass.
You won't be able to do banking,
etc., etc. Yeah, there's a great deal of social pressure. You know, you said about it being perfected in World War II, these methods. The state doesn't even have to do it now.
How do they do it? What's the in?
It's that active, evil, malevolent force, Karl.
It's the devil? Yeah, okay, perhaps. I don't disagree, but how's he doing it? The more interdependent we are, the less room there is for freedom. I wonder if that's got to be true. So the more that you let others into your brain space all the time, the less room there is for you.
Yep. What does that say about relationships like your marriage, though?
I think it's different. And I'm not just saying this because Melissa listens to the podcast.
Hey, babe.
But because there's an ends means kind of a thing here. Okay. Am I a means to an end? I think that the people who are trying to get into my noosphere, into my brain space and take it over.
Noosphere. I like it.
Yeah. they want to use me. I'm an economic unit to them, or I'm a political unit to them that they need to get to go the right way. In many aspects of life, my wife doesn't care what I think, but is interested in what I think. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, you can think whatever you want to think, and you're not going to be excommunicated from maliciousness for that, but she is interested in whatever that might be.
Yeah, which is the way it should be with friends, right?
Yep.
You don't need them to buckle under, and because they're your friends and you think that this person is good, you think the things that he or she thinks are, neat.
Neat.
Yeah. So treating, it's the way Kant put it. Kant had at least a couple of good turns of phrase, where you consider the person to be an end in himself and not a means.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty good formulation. And if you have that, then it's different. I'm respecting that you can do what you want. Yeah. And I'm not using you to get my own benefit and only my own benefit.
But you said earlier, why is it happening? And I said, popped off about a act of malevolence.
Mm-hmm.
Why are people treated as ends or means? These psychic objects, he calls them. Why is that?
Because they can. Because somewhere in here, Marcel says something about
precious.
Somewhere Marcel says something about reverence.
Sacrilege and
so something about how you treat the human being is as if it is something transcendent. As if to degrade it is not just a crime, but sacrilege. Sacrilege is a religious term. It has a term in religious law, in canon law. If you go and deface an altar, you have committed sacrilege, because the altar is supposed to be something holy. Okay, it goes beyond you, beyond the time and space that you're in, so don't poop on the altar. If you treat the human in that way, then you will be less likely, hopefully not likely at all, to view that human as an economic unit to be ground up and made hamburger out of.
Yep. Yeah, there's something sacred about the individual that is being trod on. Page 18, he says, we must admit that there are real and practical methods that can be applied to any of us tomorrow with the effect of depriving us of self-sovereignty, or less grandiosely, of self-control, even though in another age we would have had sound reasons for regarding that self-sovereignty as infrangible and inviolable.
Yeah, so something's changed. We used to think, or at least some of us used to think, that the human was some kind of bit of divine stuff. And I don't even think the details of that are, important. At least for ethics, are hugely important.
Yeah, are humans special or not?
If they're not, they're a product.
A psychic object.
Yeah.
Into that, Karl, like the divine stuff thing, he says that if you have the materialist philosophy, then it's completely incompatible with free men. Or with individual freedom.
Yeah.
So what's materialism, Karl?
If there is only bits of matter in motion. If Lucretius was right. So if it's a bunch of atoms in motion, I'm looking at your picture on a computer screen. Okay. So, and presuming that you're there in Oklahoma, and that there's a physical being there, and that the thoughts that I'm calling Scott Hambrick are not actually had by anybody. But there's just a bunch of neurons and a bunch of, sodium ions, whatever it is that are flipping around in your neural net. Well, where's the real you?
Well, just, my functional MRI says that I'm a network of this, and my pH is blood chemistry is that. And so there you go. I think I can't help but be me.
But you snuck in something there. You snuck in the personal pronoun. I have an MRI, my MRI.
Right.
There's a ghost in the machine that's experiencing this stuff. Well, if it's all atoms in motion, there's no ghost. There's no ghosts.
Is that what they call the hard problem of consciousness?
A whole bunch of ones and zeros don't make a thought. And if all you're thinking of is ones and zeros, then when you look at these other people, they cease to look like people.
Yeah.
It's the problem with the hammer. If the only tool you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. And so if humans It's dehumanization. If humans aren't something, I hate to go back to Kant. Kant didn't think he could get to God, and so he didn't. But he said you needed to assume it for the purposes of ethics. As if, because otherwise he thought you had to act correctly. And the only way that you could convince yourself to act correctly is if there was an eternal judge that would, guarantee the value of the things you're acting for and punish if you didn't. So, in other words, he had his ethical intuition that humans are the people you shouldn't screw with. And that required him to posit something else. Well, let's take that away, because we don't do that anymore, generally. So take away every aspect of the transcendent, and like Marcel says, have a materialistic conception of the universe, and you find out that it is radically incompatible with the idea of a free man. That what is a man? Is a man a bunch of atoms in motion, or is a man something more?
Yeah. If you're a materialist, then that's what you think you are. I mean, I'm selling in the you. I get it. But your opinion of yourself, if it's low, cannot be had, he says, without degrading your opinion of the rest of mankind. So it seems like the more. That's one of my laws. The more degraded you think man is, the more degraded man will become. And it's a vicious cycle and a race to the bottom.
Yeah, so I really like that idea of, well, he goes full on Platonic, and it makes me happy. He says something like, our only recourse can be to the transcendent. It's getting continental in here.
I know, it's getting super continental.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Transcendent, that which goes beyond your physical abstraction of what that is in front of you. If I were to take Scott Hambrick, put him on a table, dissect him, get all the atoms separated out and cataloged.
Everybody see the little diagram that says that you're made up of like 6.7 kilograms of carbon and this much sodium, and you could buy it all at the chemical supply warehouse for $7.81.
Yeah, so I'm breaking you into your bits like the Star Trek transporter. Oh, by the way, every time they take the transporter in Star Trek, those people are getting killed. And they're making a new version at the other end.
What does that do to their lifespan?
I don't know, but we're on like Kirk number 58 right now.
At least.
That's my theory. I think Bones is right not to want to go into that thing. But
that damnable thing.
Right. So we separate out all your bits and pieces. What's left? Is there anywhere in there that we find Scott Hambrickness? Where's the organ of it?
The sum is greater than the parts?
Yeah. Yeah, there's something that resists the abstraction. Abstraction is just a fancy Latin word for pulling apart. Like it has the root traction in it.
To pull away.
Pulling away, yeah. So I hate it. I mean, you have to get mystical. I'm sorry, but I think I'm convinced.
I think I'm convinced.
I'm convinced that there's more to a human than the bunch of atoms and molecules. The problem is, this is not something that you can prove in a syllogism.
You bet. I mean, I agree that that's true, but I can't point at it. I can't point at it. I mean, there is death, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're alive, boom. Then you ain't, and that 240 pounds of Karl pot roast laying there on the deathbed ain't Karl no more.
Yeah,
it seems to be something that happens.
Something moves on. Yeah, there's some kind of change of being, which is hard to scan just with...
What are you weighing?
It's 243 this morning.
Hey, look at that. Listen to me. Guess those weights.
I'm a little worried I'm not going to make weight at Nationals.
What are you going to weigh in at?
241.9.
Oh, you'll be fine.
I want to get... I don't want to be in the 275 class.
No.
So... It gets mystical, and people are going to say this is unscientific. Of course it's unscientific.
All that crap about, it's unscientific, show me your sources, all that stuff. That's the materialism, guys.
Mm-hmm.
It's sneaking in. He says that materialistic attitudes have acquired a virulence and cohesion, which it was far from possessing in the last century. I mean, it's just a snowball. And you'll see, real peer review on Twitter, where they post all these peer-reviewed excerpts from all these peer-reviewed sociology papers and social sciences papers on Twitter. These people are just making shit up under the rubric of science. and induction. They're doing continental philosophy, Karl, but they're tucking it up under the rubric of science, of induction.
Yeah, well, and you're saying bad things about continental philosophy. I figure there's two kinds there.
There's good and bad.
There's Jean-Paul, and then there's Marcel. There's Edith Stein, and then there's Heidegger.
Simone.
There's different ways to go here.
Simone pedophile.
If you wanted to scan it, so Marcel's kind of an existentialist, I guess, sort of. It's kind of a mood. People are very concerned about man's place in the world, but you have two answers. One, there is a place, and two, there isn't. So Sartre would be, there isn't. So it's all it's a philosophy of the absence of the transcendent. And somebody like Marcel is a philosophy of the presence of the transcendent. But because it's transcendent, it's all going to be weird. It's not going to be syllogisms. I think you're going to like the bit he says about evil. Evil is a mystery. It is not something which can be assimilated to the notion of something lacking. So the traditional way that we would talk about evil, if you were a Thomist, is you say that evil is a lack of some good that should be there. Okay, so the pothole is an evil because it is a lack of pavement that ought to be there.
Yep.
That may be true, but there seems to be something more, okay? When you've experienced genuine evil, and you, dear listener, probably have, okay?
And if you haven't, just hang on.
Yeah, it's coming. Does it feel like a lack of a good that ought to be there?
Thomas's formulation does not match my phenomenology.
But I think Marcel's right about this. Well, no, I don't know if he's right. I think it's making me chew on it a lot. So when you experience evil, it sure feels like malice. It sure feels like rebellion. It sure feels like hate. Where somebody will do something not in his best interests, but is in the interest of screwing with you.
Yep.
The way you read this is, fish in the ocean do not commit acts of malice. They just eat each other.
Right. They're just having dinner.
Right. Humans who have access to the transcendent can also reject it. We're the ones that have acts of rebellion. We're the ones who can screw with each other and really, grind. And, I'm not just going to beat him. I'm going to crush him. It feels like more than just a mere metaphysical lack. But, it's continental philosophy. You can't prove it.
He talks a little bit about surveillance.
Yeah.
He says, in such a society, this degraded society where freedom really doesn't exist, this society that holds a materialist conception of man, if they have a materialist conception of man, then his inner thoughts aren't his; they're just something. They're bits and bytes and zeros and ones, and Facebook can have them. So he says, such a society. The mere keeping, for instance, of an intimate diary might be a capital crime, and one does not see why, by the use of tape recorders and tapped telephones, as well as by various quite conceivable extensions of the use of radio, it should not be quite possible to keep the police well informed about the thoughts and feelings of any individual whatsoever. From the point of view of the individual in such a society, there is no conceivable way out at all. Private life, as such, does not exist anymore. Well, we're ass deep in that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I want to go back to what you said at the beginning, talking about an inner life. If we're just bits of stuff in motion, there's no inner.
Yeah.
There's no inner. If you have a materialistic philosophy, then it's all you're doing is manipulating bits of matter. There's no inner, there's no outer.
There's nothing even to hurt.
Right. And so if you could get enough surveillance that you could get all the bits of matter going in good ways, I guess. But I snuck something in there, the notion of the good. But if you could, then why wouldn't you?
Boy, when I get in charge, we're going to get them all to move the right way.
Right.
When we do it, when we get the real stuff this time, it's all going to be good.
The problem with the surveillance state, they just haven't done it right yet. They need the right people, right?
Yeah, and in this, so this is where his talk about the transcendent comes up. He says, in this surveillance state, you can't have an inner life. And the only recourse that you can have, the only access to freedom that you would have would be in the transcendent. And we have to proclaim that we do not entirely belong to a world of objects.
If you don't have some notion that a human is more than just the thing, the mass of meat sitting in front of you, then why not get everything you can about that mass of meat? And you might not like where his conclusion leads you. You might say, Marcel, yeah, we know you were a religious guy, but we're not into that anymore. Okay, fine. But if you're not into that anymore, where do you get the defense of the dignity of the human?
Yeah. What are you into?
Yeah, so I just think back the little thing we did on my friend Friedrich about all of the coattails of God. You get rid of God, you get rid of a whole bunch of other things. Personal dignity, privacy, inner life, all of that stuff goes away. Because why shouldn't it? If I can improve you with techniques, I think I probably should.
Yeah. So, Karl, I know that you're a little artsy.
I'm a little bit artsy.
You're a little bit artsy. And he says that in creating, we can tap into the transcendent a little bit. And that's a good way to be free. But then he cautions us, and I love this. Marcel's thinking my thoughts. Oh, I'll just read this whole chunk. I should say that in the case particularly of the true artist in paint or stone or music or words, this relationship to the transcendent is something that is experienced in the most authentic and profound way. Sounds good. I'll have some of that. And then he says, but I'm supposing, of course, that he does not yield to the innumerable temptations to which the artist is exposed today. The temptation to startle, to innovate at all costs, to shut oneself up in a private world, leaving as few channels as possible open for communication with the world of eternal forms, and so on. But nothing could be falser and more dangerous than to base on these observations of mine some sort of neo-aestheticism. I think that is a really great assessment of most art today. It succumbs to the temptation to startle, to innovate at all costs.
So a good artist has to be a Platonist?
I will declare right now and for all time, yes. No, I don't know about that.
Well, you and I are both fans of jazz. Okay.
I think you have to believe in something true.
What about freedom of expression?
Who cares? I can express myself through the majesty of throwing my poop at you.
Yeah. So my answer would be, what are you trying to express?
Right.
Freedom to express, sure, but what are you expressing? I've listened to a whole lot of jazz, and I kind of get off the train with Ornette Coleman.
I'm off at Coltrane's death.
Yeah.
And Coltrane's pushing it.
He's pushing it, but he circled back at the end.
Yeah.
Nobody listens to Schoenberg.
I've got a friend who's screw up your talk here. Nobody listens to Benjamin Britten. I've got a friend who's a professional musician. He's a bass player, and you've heard some of his music, some of his work on TV shows like The Simpsons and American Dad, and he does session stuff. And he told me one time that the death of jazz occurred when New York City passed a, oh my gosh, what did they call it? It'll come to me in a minute. It was a tax based on the square footage of the dance floor. Cabaret tax, that's what he called it. Mm-hmm. And when they got rid of dancing in the Blue Note and so on, the music became started to be made for other musicians, and they just went down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, there's a lot of things you can do in music, but you get, I tell you, there's forms in music. That's what music theory is. It's mathematical, and there's forms. There, you can study harmony. I could call out a chord progression to you with Roman numerals, and you would understand it. It has a structure to it that we discovered. We didn't make up. And there's plenty of room for variation in that, but the octave, the fifth, these are mathematical relationships. And that John Cage thing, 4 minutes and 33 seconds.
No.
Have you ever heard it?
Can you hear it?
You just go sit in the park for 4 minutes and 33 seconds.
That's Thomas Evil. It's the absence of. It's just.
Yeah. And so I remember I was listening to another podcast. I was cheating on you. I was listening to something other than Barbell Logic or the Online Great Books podcast. It was about art, and there was a woman on there who runs, I think, the Da Vinci Institute, which teaches classical drawing techniques to whoever wants to learn them. And they were talking about how you can go to see paintings now and have no idea if they're any good.
Sounds perfect. Oh, wait a minute. It's not that it's not mediated. You can just look at the thing and not even know what it is.
Yeah, you can look at it and not know if a 2-year-old made it, or an elephant in the zoo made it, or the world's greatest artist made it. And what you have to do in art is you have to ask the expert. You've got to get the art critic to come in and tell you, is this good? You know, which goes back to what I said at the beginning of the podcast. The books that we hide away, that you're not allowed to read them, you can't think of them. Once you get divorced from the transcendent, that means there's no there, and it becomes fashion.
Ugh.
So what you're really asking when you say, is this art good, is this art fashionable?
Yeah, Norman Rockwell ain't fashionable. I just think it's just lovely, though. Wonderful. I mean, it's great art. He has something to say there. He has something that he thinks is real and true. And the Hambrickian aesthetic says that the artist can do anything that they want to do, and that they select the things that they do to create an image that represents something particular. Right? I mean, it doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen. And so even the Jackson Pollock, who we deuce on every single show, he could have done anything. And what he chose to do was, in fact, nothing in the name of having done something. And his message is that your efforts suck. I think that's what it is. Like, oh, you learn representative photorealistic painting methods and paint noble scenes of heroic daring do and human accomplishment, and it was your life's work. I'm going to drip stuff on this painting, and we're going to put it right next to yours.
Yeah.
Or at least down the hall in the other wing.
Yeah.
And he's crapping on human achievement.
Right.
And that's what he chose to do. He chose to do that.
I had a moment of melancholy earlier today. I was thinking about what we were going to talk about.
That's degrading.
Yeah, humans just being degraded. We give us such thin gruel. So I've been doing a project on my own. I've turned into Charles Emerson Winchester in my later life, the third. So I'm sitting out there in my gym listening to Beethoven. Because I thought, look, I've got streaming music. Let's use the internet for something good. And so this is my project. There's 138 works in all of the works of Beethoven that are listed. And I started at 1, and today I'm at 18. 18 is the first string quartet, which is fantastic. And I'm going to go all the way to 138. It's so good. It's so good. I was, the second movement of that string quartet.
What was his?
I'm a sucker for his adagios.
You had me at adagio. What do you think his IQ was?
Oh, gosh. Unmeasurable. 185. I don't know.
Yeah.
He never heard the later stuff.
I know.
Which is amazing. So 1802, he's deaf, and he lives to like 1827 or something, and composes the whole time. But so I'm listening to this, and it's so beautiful, but it takes a little bit of effort to get in. Not too much. I mean, you can go in as deep as you want, and it's good all the way down. And the music that our children, or most of us, listen to, well, it's not real good. It's real thin. You know, it might have a prepackaged beat to it and some auto-tune to it, and we'll do some shocking lyrics. I don't know how much more shocking they can get, but...
Hold on. It's coming. You like the Ramones?
Yeah. Yeah, am I allowed to?
Yeah, I like the Ramones. It's not Beethoven.
Little catchy tunes.
Yeah, a minute, 51 seconds of high school anger.
Well, I'm a fan of high school anger.
I haven't listened to any Ramones in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll probably listen to the Ramones less and less as time goes on. But I suspect that my Beethoven listening will go up.
Right.
The art's degrading.
Yeah, it makes it so that's all you can listen to. So if you listen to bad stuff long enough, or you're never exposed to anything better, and this goes the same for literature and movies and everything else too. If all you get into your mind space is thin gruel, that's all you can digest. And so if somebody puts on a Bach fugue or something, which is like the height of Western civilization, you're just going to yawn.
Karl said that.
This is boring.
Right.
And that's sad. I mean, my daughter's favorite novel, she's a nerd. My daughter's favorite novel is that Victor Hugo one with the French name, Les Miserables.
Yeah.
And she loves it. She's read it 3 times. Well, how many people can read that?
Not me.
Well, or something like
Right.
that. You know, how many people can dive into something that good and get it? And it bothers me. I guess you can lead your own life, but your life ought to be better.
We're just coming off our little 2-part podcast about Lord of the Rings, and I've gotten a couple of emails, and I know you've gotten emails or messages from people that said that they had tried it and just couldn't get through it, and they wanted to. It's not that they didn't like it, or it wasn't for them. Like, they tried and they couldn't do it. I mean, and these are people that have got the horsepower to do it. Like, their phonics are good, their attention span's all right, but the self has been degraded in us to the point that some of the higher things, those transcendent things, aren't accessible to us anymore.
Yeah. So if you take Marcel's words about our need for eternal forms, I mean, he's not an Orthodox Platonist or anything, but
what's that?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Proclus, maybe. If you have the idea that there is transcendence, that there's something above, and above is a metaphor, but there's something above.
There's something prior. Aristotle would say prior.
Yeah. What that makes you do, well, I like the above because of where I'm going with this. There's something above. What that gets you to do is climb. If everything's flat, and you believe everything's flat, and your culture tells you everything's flat, you don't climb. Everything's the same as everything else. Like Jeremy Bentham said, pushpin's the same as poetry. You end up not being able to enjoy the best stuff there is.
Jeremy Bentham, the inventor of the panopticon prison, brute that he was. Yeah. So Marcel says, right, it's in the it's the 3rd paragraph of chapter 2 on lost liberties. He says there are 2 considerations here, and one of these considerations, he says, is equality. The illegitimate kinds of liberty of which it is the general intention to deprive us are regarded as intolerable privileges which have to be reduced and suppressed till the situation of each of us becomes as similar as possible to that of his neighbor. And I think one of the projects of the degraders is to render Les Miserables inaccessible to large numbers of us. I mean, there are certain things that are inaccessible to people, and there's nothing we can do about that. Differential equations are almost inaccessible to me, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't be accessible to you. But I think one of the projects of modern aesthetics and modern art is to dull, flatten, dilute access to the transcendent and to leave us all with the same experience.
Yeah, why would they do that?
Nobody walks up to Miro and cries. Nobody's breath is taken away by, I was going to say the Guernica, but I think there are some fucked up people that are moved by that thing. But it ain't like the David Guernica.
I have mixed feelings on that. I was watching
Goya or Guernica.
The one about the town getting destroyed.
Yeah, but who's doing more effective art there? Picasso and his Cubist stuff, or Goya's depictions of that Spanish Civil War atrocity?
Oh, probably Goya.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's this little flamenco singer that she sang in front of the Guernica. It made a nice double to hear the music and watch and look at the painting. I have suspicions about Picasso. I think he probably hated people.
Clearly.
Towards the end, because he's dissecting them in his paintings. There's no beauty to it.
And by the way, I just screwed up. I went and double-checked my work there. Goya, he was earlier. We're talking about he's in the Peninsular War. So he's depicting the horrors of the Peninsular War when Napoleon and the Grand Army subjugated Spain. But same kind of stuff, same region of the world, 2 different outlooks, 100 years apart, I'll take Goya. I think it's a higher art. I think it says more to people, and I think it honors the individuals that were hurt more than this stuff, this degrading stuff.
Yeah, the thing you see in Picasso's paintings, so in Guernica, what you see, I have to pull it up if we're going to talk about it.
The 3rd of May is the painting I was thinking of.
Well, I'm going to look at Guernica right now. And if you look at it, the thing is, there's nothing beautiful in the painting. Okay, so it's all horror and broken bits everywhere. Yeah, it's kind of in a cartoon fashion.
It is just disintegration.
Right. Where's the human? Where's the glory of the human so that you know what was lost? It might as well be a pile of meat. And I don't know that Picasso felt that way.
How he felt about it doesn't matter. The damn thing's there for us to see now, and he's long gone.
Yeah. I'm not a huge fan.
But Goya is gone.
Well, he left a bunch of his stuff in Chicago. I think he left it as a joke. We have that big flying cow thing.
Right. Yeah, the garroted man.
Boy, if you have a bit of the transcendent in your art, I think it makes a huge difference. There's a perspective. There's a vanishing point. There's a point of view, something of beauty. Yeah, I'm with Marcel on that.
Yeah, and he says part of this degradation is in rendering us as simple as possible to that of our neighbors. And I want to keep people weird. I want to keep people a little eclectic. I want to keep their experiences individual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I saw some cool stuff in here that I liked, that I thought was interesting. So in my book, it's page 21, but there's a connection between bureaucracy and resentment. It becomes less and less possible, except at high levels, for somebody employed in a great administrative job to take a real interest in what he is doing, in a great administrative machine to take a real interest in what he is doing. It has to become abstract. If you're working at the department of whatever in a huge nation, can you possibly stay interested in the persons that are coming to see you?
No, you only see them as a trouble and an inconvenience.
Which I think we experience this. We see this is true, or it seems to be true.
I've been to airport security.
There's just no way you can get through the job. Here you come through airport security, say, "Hi, how's your day? How are you going?" If I show actual concern, and talk to you, well, it doesn't work through the lines. So the more and more that we're stuck in mass movements, the less and less we can see the person. So I was listening to somebody talk about New York. So if you're in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and you ask for directions, you're probably going to ask more like this. I can't do the accent, but you're going to say, well, how would you ask for directions in Tulsa?
Hey, can you help me find the local chicken fried steak restaurant?
Oh, sure. Where are you coming from? I haven't seen you here before, right? There's going to be a conversation, right? In New York City, I have heard that this happens, that if you start with anything other than, where's Rockefeller Center?
Right, excuse me, could you?
Nope, you won't get an answer. It's too fast. It has to be mere function. Because there's so many people, there's no time to do anything else. They're all packed and moving. I think Tulsa's probably better.
He says that the more degraded we get, degraded that we get, the more we become these sort of functionaries. And that the only natural end to such a golly, here I go, patooey. The only natural end to such a process is military or economic catastrophe. And such catastrophes occur at the moment when a society whose constitution has insensibly degenerated becomes absolutely paralytic. It collapses. Jives.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he says as it becomes more and more insecure, the situation becomes more and more insecure, that people flock to anything at all they can lean on. And he says in France, after World War II, people flocked to the civil service. And the more of them that flocked to the civil service, the more hidebound the society became, the less agency people felt, and the more they felt the way that brought them to the civil service in the first place. It's just a vicious cycle.
The mass movement towards state employment is in the nature of a sort of mad rush towards servitude. Yeah, so you're looking for something that can give you security. When you start working for the state starts controlling the culture. It is a conflict of interest. I remember Nietzsche talking about this in the Things on Education a while back. Once everything's run by the state, it's a big circle. It's a big circle, and the only thoughts that you're able to think are the ones that are conducive to the machine that's doing the thinking.
I said on the Barbell Logic podcast a few months ago, one of the parts of the Hambrick plan, and that is that when I get in charge, because we just need the right person to be in charge, then everything will be okay, right? But when I get to be put in charge, I'm going to sell the fire stations and all their equipment, and send all the firemen home, and I'm going to put all that money in a fund. And then when your house burns down, one guy is going to drive out there on a tricycle and put a yellow ribbon around it to keep people from running into the house. And then the city is just going to write you a check for the house that burned down. And that would be cheaper. And we also then we wouldn't have a bunch of civil service voters out there voting for their union interest against you, etc. The firemen hated me, but a bunch of people didn't. But we've been taught that you have to have them. Like the government has taught us that, from kindergarten, who are the people in your neighborhood? And they tell you about the fireman and the policeman and the teacher and the mailman. And what would you like to be when you grow up, Johnny? And they hand you a little cardboard book with pictures of the mailman and the army man and the doctor and the policeman and the fire. Like, it's all a script that's been running since about 1915. And how you get out of it? The whole thing has to be so hidebound that it collapses.
Yeah, it's a perpetuation of itself. It's a self-perpetuation machine.
Yeah.
We have a name for that, right? Perpetual motion machine.
But who will save you if you're on the 39th floor of the such and such when it catches on fire?
Well, maybe if you have a 39-story building, you hire people.
Or maybe you don't build 39-story buildings.
Maybe.
And then you don't have to live stacked up on top of each other. And then when you ask for directions, people can take a minute and lean on the shovel and tell you it's down, turn a left at the old oak tree.
That's all crazy talk.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. We need to be rootless cosmopolitans. We need to be 50,000 per square meter.
You sound like a distributivist. You need to go read some Hilaire Belloc and G.K. Chesterton.
Maybe.
Your agrarian ideal. So I really like the end of chapter 2.
One might say, without any paradox at all, that what men need most at the present hour is a course of treatment according to the prescriptions of Plato.
Yes. Yes. Which, dear listener, you can find the next time we open up enrollment at onlinegreatbooks.com. Because we, in fact, do a course of treatment according to the prescriptions of Plato.
So what do you think that means, though, for him? The prescriptions of Plato. Was he thinking about the Republic? I wrote 3 question marks underneath that.
I don't think it's the Republic, because if you're going to spend a chapter talking about the dangers inherent in the administrative state, okay, which there are, especially when it becomes its own constituency and votes itself stuff. All right, So if you're going to talk about the dangers of that like he was in 1952, then you don't mean the Republic. You don't mean the Republic, at least on a surface reading. Okay?
Yep.
I think what you mean is what he was talking about earlier, like when we talked about transcendence in art.
Yeah.
That you got to kind of sort of believe there's things like forms.
How about this? Ideals.
Sure, but ideals, I want them stronger than ideals. Like, if you ask me what my ideals are 600-pound squat, or never hawk a loogie in the water fountain. I have ideals, but they're things that I came up with. If we want to have ideals, something that puts a demand on you. So if you are going to get your guitar chops back together and go play in a jazz band, it's not going to be that whatever you play is good. You're going to try like heck to make sure that you match up to the good that you think is out there, that there's some sort of an ideal way to play guitar, at least as instantiated in you, that you want to try to get to. Just like a painter's going to do. I got a vision of something, and I'm the one to paint it. And I need to try to match up to it. And I might fail, and I might succeed. But, it's like the transcendent. It makes you want to climb. I think that's what he means.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. The prescriptions And it's probably also just the Socratic pursuit of the truth as well.
Right. And the unity of the love and the intellect, which you get from Symposium, where Socrates says that the one thing I am, I'm the world's greatest lover. And he means it. He doesn't mean physically.
Yeah. Alcibiades is literally butthurt about the whole thing. Well, there's an Online Great Books podcast. Come here for the Marcel. Get the pederasty humor.
Gosh.
Is that a good way to button this up?
Oh, we could.
I like Marcel. I think he has important things to say. I don't know that he, like Continentals, I don't know that he makes his points, but he challenges you to wrestle him, and that may be his point.
Yeah, well, he's pointing at points.
Yeah.
You know, if that sounds weird. So I'm going to make my defense of continental philosophy in general. They're trying to talk about the stuff behind the curtain. And unfortunately, you can't pull away the curtain. All you can do is say, well, here in front of the curtain, it seems like there's probably something like that behind it.
He's in the cave talking to the rest of us in the cave.
Yeah, but he said, there's probably something up there. I don't know what it is. Yeah. But there's got to be something up there. We should act like we believe there's something up there. If you find him intriguing, Man Against Mass Society is a good start. A few other books of his that I like. The big one is called Mystery of Being. It's some lectures he gave, I think, in Scotland somewhere. The plays are, if you don't want to delve into really thick, wandering prose, read the plays. There's maybe 5 of them available in English, I think. And they're kind of funny, actually, with little twists and turns in them. So he liked his drama. He thought he was mostly a playwright, not a philosopher.
Smart guy, sweet guy, cared deeply about his fellow man. And I haven't read any of these plays, but that's a pretty good recipe for somebody that might be a decent playwright.
Yep.
Upcoming, Plutarch, a little Plutarch, How a Man May Become Aware of His Progress in Virtue. Friend of the show, Brett McKay, told me we needed to do that one. And I looked at it and I said, looks pretty good. Had not read it. And then I would like to propose this one, Karl.
Okay.
Propaganda by Edward Bernays, Freud's nephew.
I don't know that one.
A tattered copy of which Goebbels was said to carry in his pocket. Well, we've been talking about this degradation here. We've been talking about it with Marcel here. I think we set the stage actually with talking about self-reliance in Federalist America. And then we go to 1952 here and we talk about this degradation that Marcel is pointing to. Then we'll look a little bit at Leviathan and what he thinks the state should do in order to protect people from each other because they are awful in a state of nature. And then we can talk a little bit about propaganda, which is one of these big tools that can be used to degrade people. And it can also be used for good, Karl. It can also be used to get people to brush their teeth twice a day.
Weaponized rhetoric.
Yep. That's one of the things I want to talk about. Like, how does propaganda differ, if at all, from rhetoric? Is all rhetoric propaganda? Is all propaganda rhetoric? Like, where's that Venn diagram of crap talk go?
Yeah. So this is some inside baseball stuff. I kind of like the way this show's going. And if you guys are still listening out there, like we're 2 guys talking about stuff that's leading us to other stuff, which is leading us to other stuff. I think that's what humans ought to do.
It's life affirming, isn't it? Like, I get to read what other people did. I get to read other people's thoughts, but it's still an expression of me. You know, So I'm like, oh, this is interesting. This question comes up in me. Well, where can I go now for help with that question? And I don't get lost in it, even though I'm reading the thoughts of other people. No, wait a minute. I get lost all the time because these guys are heavy hitters. But that which is me is not lost, even though I'm in the books, their books.
Yeah, I remember when I was getting into Great Books education, one of the guys, I think it was Peter Gilbert, he used to teach at St. John's, I think, if he's out there. Hi, Peter. He said, well, everybody's got to teach every class because you want your people to model the sort of person that you think people ought to be. You're not forcing them to be a certain kind of person. But I would love for there to be more people that we can sit down after dinner and have a conversation about Plutarch with.
Yep.
That's a good end goal, to have more people that can listen to Beethoven.
Can I ever get you to play bridge, though?
I don't know. I have a hard time with euchre.
Karl hates card games.
I'll have to try. You have to attest to me that there's something of transcendent good at the end of the rainbow for bridge.
It is the chess of card games. It scratches all the same itches in my brain that chess scratches, whatever that means.
But I feel like if I learn to play it, and then I'll come over and I'll bring my wife, and she'll be good at it because she's a card shark, and I'll be getting yelled at.
She's pretty competitive.
Yeah.
Well, there's another one of these shows. Read along with us a little bit. We need to probably create a little portal on the website to put PDFs of these things that we can, that are out of copyright and that we can put in there for our fans to follow.
Yeah, or an ISBN number.
Well, there's another show. Thank you so very much for listening. Send this to one of your buddies. Maybe do it yourself, right? Maybe you guys can pick out a little reading list and do this kind of things yourself. Karl and I mean, we are just a group of two, and I enjoy this a great deal. It's one of my favorite things I do all week. And if you can just get when 2 or 3 are gathered together, you guys can do good work together. So try that out, and keep following us here, and we'll model how to do that, or at least how to not do it. But take what you can from us and do something on your own. We all must act.